In 1994, Nintendo was coming off a golden age of consistent success. They'd beaten out the Sega Genesis with a video game console whose wiring can fit in a literal toaster, and followed up with both the SNES and the Game Boy in the late 80s, both wildly successful. However, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was running out of steam, and even having one of the greatest games of all time, Home Improvement, could only keep it going for so long. Further complicating their future was the release of the PS1 that year, which marked a serious paradigm shift in the games industry. 3D wasn't just some new gimmick designed to make purchasing a Sega Saturn sound like a reasonable idea, it was a transformative new way to interact with the medium. Miyamoto decided they would need a new 3D Zelda game to wow people with the technology, and so development began on a remake of Link's Adventure. It's supposed to be The Adventure of Link. I wrote it wrong in the script. I'm very sorry about that. Which would use an FX chip to utilize the limited capabilities of the SNES when it came to 3D. However, the 3D technology needed to realize Miyamoto's vision of sword fighting combat was bad. Games like Star Fox existed, but they didn't exactly look even close to what the PS1 was capable of. It was actually supposed to be first person, which the SNES had a D-pad and 6 buttons. I don't know how they expected it to turn out. The project was scrapped, likely because of the technology and the new console Nintendo was developing being posed to replace the SNES, tentatively titled Project Reality, later changed to the less cool N64. Initially, the team working on the new Zelda had all of 3 people, one of which was the game director Yoshiaki Koizumi. However, as time went on, all sorts of new features were proposed. On top of the combat, they toyed with a dedicated jump button, full camera control, and on top of the items, the Sage Medallions would actually serve a gameplay function. Also, instead of the pre-rendered backgrounds in towns, it appeared that the towns had actual building models in Hyrule Castle Market. Now, this may all sound impossibly amazing and high-tech for the N64, but rest assured, it was. They developed it for the cancelled N64 disk drive, but after the ill-fated collaboration with Philips gave the world, redacted, they thought better and downgraded to the regular N64 hardware. And to match their ambition, they expanded the team they were working with. During this expansion period, Koizumi and Miyamoto hired concept artist Yusuke Nakano, who, after working on titles like Game Boy Wario Land games, was tasked with helping the outsourced artists come up with good promo art for the next game in the Legend of Zelda franchise, now tentatively given the title Ocarina of Time. After seeing the results and being deeply dissatisfied, he asked Koizumi if he could do the promo art himself. He knew that he had to really win Koizumi over by justifying this decision, which didn't happen. Not because he couldn't get Koizumi to agree, because he just won him over that easily. See, before pen had hit paper, Koizumi had created a 3D model of Link. Rather than the now standard practice of creating concept art that they would then base game assets on, the model was what inspired the rest of the art created for the game. This posed a unique challenge to Nakano, especially considering the model isn't breathtaking per se. Anyway, he did all the art for the promotional material, which then went on to inspire the 3D models for the characters in the game, creating the beloved cast of Ocarina of Time. There to assist him were young artists Yoshiki Haruhana, Satoru Takizawa, Jin Ikeda, and Satomi Asakawa, who were all pretty or completely new to the company, and contributed some additional concept art. Nakano's name, after this entry, would be inextricably tied to the Zelda series. He was to Zelda's art as Grant Kirkhope was to Donkey Kong's music, in many ways a core part of the series' soul. Video game art was forever changed by the development of Ocarina of Time, with it paving the way for artists like Nakano to work as closely with game developers as they do. Video over, bye! Hey guys, thanks for... This is the story that people are often told about the development of the art of Ocarina of Time, and it's kinda true. Nakano did a substantial chunk of the artwork for Ocarina, but this narrative has a pretty massive hole in it. It's easy to get the impression reading interviews that Nakano was the mastermind behind all the art and design work. And this video is not intended to downplay his accomplishments. He was a talented dude, and he's a large part of why Ocarina and subsequent Zelda games had an in-house art team at all. He brought an energy and enthusiasm to every project he worked on that was infectious and energizing to the rest of the team. He's one of the most important people in the legacy of Zelda, but he himself isn't the full picture. Since from everything I was able to gather, he was largely responsible for many of the important characters. Which is also not to imply that he throws the rest of his art team under the bus, just that games media often unintentionally will. This video is not about him. If you follow video game concept art in any serious capacity, you probably know him, and the key word of this video is unsung. Today, I want to take a look at an artist you probably skipped over when they were featured in the credits of your favorite Zelda games. Remember those supporting artists I was talking about? Probably not. I wrote the video specifically so that your brain would skip over them. I'd like to return to one Satomi Asakawa, the person responsible for the wonderfully bizarre sidecast of Ocarina and most every subsequent Zelda, up until Breath of the Wild, which she started development around the time she retired to become a therapist. Most of you have probably never heard of her. I didn't until I researched and wrote a much more boring video and decided to scrap it and make this one. But yeah, for her entire career, she basically exclusively designed side characters. Which sounds pretty thankless, but dang did she put her heart into it, and she seems proud of her work. As she should be, the sheer volume of characters she's had to design is bonkers. Satomi Asakawa grew up in Kyoto, Japan, with a father who managed an arcade cabinet business for Sega, giving her early exposure to video games. She particularly loved the art of rareware, having loved games like Donkey Kong Country as a child, and later the Banjo-Kazooie series. Animal characters were of particular interest to Asakawa, as the short film she created at DigiPen, where she attended college, One Big Banana, was arguably what got her hired at Nintendo. The film also earned her the nickname Little Monkey, which is just so precious. She was the one who everyone referred Aonuma to when he thought of having monkey characters in Majora's Mask, gaining a reputation as the person best at designing animals. While she lived in Japan most of her life, the majority of her influence came from Western art styles, particularly Alan Rodney Greenblatt. Really? The Parappa the Rapper guy? Well, I'll be. However, this wasn't her only influence. While she never grew up playing games, she does mention that Glory of Hercules 3, a Japanese exclusive title, held a profound impact on her as a child. She realized then that video games could have deeply impactful stories, ones that moved people and made them think. She initially wanted to work for an animation studio like Pixar after graduating from DigiPen, but in a way it's fitting she ended up working in video games. At least in the West, making a statement with a video game was like making a statement with a He-Man toy. She saw more potential in the medium as a tool for storytelling than most would, and it's not hard to imagine that she wanted to impart the kind of storytelling that was starting to permeate animated film. While Nakano was involved in the promo art and designs of many of the important characters, she was involved in the development of most of the non-player characters. Remember them? If you don't, I cannot trust you. They were a huge component in Ocarina of Time's success. Zelda is lauded for its memorable NPCs, and that trend arguably started in Ocarina. Part of that was obviously hardware limitations, but also part of it was that there wasn't an enormous frame of reference for just how many cool and memorable characters they could put in the game. Name one NPC from A Link to the Past that isn't Zelda or Impa. What? Link's uncle? He has all of 3 lines and then dies. Regardless of how you feel about the transition between Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time in terms of gameplay, it's undeniable that the game had far more in the way of side content, and a lot of that is owed to the memorable side characters. Before Ocarina of Time, NPCs that actually meant something were few and far between. Yes, there were games like King's Quest, but they were entirely built around their dialogue and story. Ocarina needed to have that level of writing, while also being on the cusp of cutting-edge graphics, while also being the first fully 3D Zelda, while also having an in-depth sword-fighting system. Developing that now would be a pain. Developing it in an era where game engines had to be built from scratch, in-house, and 3D modeling software looked like the flight controls of the Starship Enterprise? Not really a surprise they eventually needed more than 3 people. The biggest shock, however, was that they cut vast swaths of the game, as one often has to do in game dev. The adventure game NPCs stayed. Which, I mean, they totally could have gotten away with generic townspeople. It was pretty standard for Zelda at the time. 1, maybe 2 unique faces in a sea of not that. But in Ocarina, characters are often completely unique in their design. Like the fishing minigame guy. He's got his own cool outfit and a different face from everyone else, and a hat you can steal. How cool is that? God, remember when the job of game designers was to make games actually fun? I'm sad now. Having uniquely handcrafted characters is something many modern titles don't bother with. They'll often use modular assets to create more generic filler townsfolk to populate the world with, which is a good approach if you want to use NPCs primarily as set dressing, but I think in striving for more technically advanced games, we've lost some of the things that are truly special, and use of handcrafted characters in this low poly art style is certainly one of them. When working on Ocarina of Time, her first assignment was to make Kepera Gebera, the wise old owl. Her only directives were on a post-it note, and yeah, Kepera Gebera isn't exactly beloved among Zelda fans, but that ain't her fault. They wrote him to be annoying. Shigeru Miyamoto was extremely impressed with her work, and he immediately put her to work on a huge chunk of the cast. Needless to say, she absolutely crushed it. The way her artwork was full of exaggerated proportions and big recognizable shapes, yet still were designed to look human, made her art stand out amongst the numerous narrative-driven games that strive for realistic characters, and the majority of N64's library which went for fully cartoonish animal characters. This is not to bash games like MGS or Chameleon Twist. Okay, it is to bash the latter a little bit. Just to point out how they were emblematic of the major trends in game artwork of the time. Asakawa managed to have some characters who looked like the popular anime of the day, some characters who looked fully cartoonish, some characters who were absolutely monstrous, and somehow managed to make it all work within Nakano's larger umbrella style. It'd be one thing for these NPCs to be unique, but there are many games where unique NPCs fail to feel significant when they aren't directly involved in the story. The kinds of games where unless they help, oppose, or betray you, they're more or less indistinguishable. And wait, what's this footage of Fallout 4 doing here? Tons of characters in Ocarina of Time that have absolutely no impact on whether or not you defeat Ganon and save the world, yet feel distinct and have become fan favorites. The creepy and impenetrably mysterious Happy Mask salesman whose smile always feels like it belies something sinister, or the tragic inhabitants of Skulltula House, who used to be noble and successful before being cursed to become utterly inhuman. Dampé, Noboru, Ruto, Darunia, Bigoron, the Po Collector, Kome, and Kotake, and really I could go on forever. And I will someday when I have enough subscribers not to care what people think, but I'm getting off track. Their side quests all have extremely compelling stories, don't get me wrong. The writing in Ocarina is great for the time and still has tons of charm, but the character designs definitely got them part of the way there. In fact, these characters would have a few design notes, and then the designs would inspire these unforgettable stories about them. Series writer Mitsuhiro Takano has gone on record to say that the story of each Zelda is laid out in broad strokes before any details get added. As they design characters, they carve out their stories and develop side plots for them. This means that if Asakawa didn't design the characters of Ocarina the way she did, we'd be looking at a completely different set of side quests. And if someone else was at the helm, I doubt they'd be half as memorable. If you look up Satomi Asakawa, you'll find she doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. For reference, my actual literal mother has a Wikipedia page. I'm not kidding when I say it was easier to find info about my own mom than it was to find info about Asakawa. It goes to show that sometimes the ground level developers who make the game happen get sidelined in favor of the managers that funded them or the corporation they work under. Even Yusuke Nakano often gets relegated to the sidelines behind Miyamoto and Koizumi. But it's worth remembering that the games we love aren't brought to life by a building with a logo. They're brought to life by people. Asakawa is one of those people, and now that she's retired from the games industry, we'll likely never see her work again. It's sad, but I can't help but feel grateful for what we do have. On the off chance Asakawa ever gets to see this, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for all the work you've done, making these games that much more magical. You deserve to be remembered, and I hope this video, if nothing else, is proof that you won't be.